This afternoon, I'm here with Rear Admiral William Baumgartner, who retired from the U.S. Coast Guard in 2013. He served as commander of the 7th Coast Guard District, and he served as the Judge Advocate General and Chief Counsel of the U.S. Coast Guard. He has a Bachelor of Sciences degree in Marine Engineering and Mechanical Engineering, as well as a Master of Business Administration and a Juris Doctor degree from Harvard Law School, where he graduated magna cum laude. Currently, Rear Admiral Baumgartner serves as part of the team at the National Security Leaders for America, which is a leading think tank made up of individuals who served in leadership positions in all six military branches, as well as elected federal and state officials. Rear Admiral Baumgartner, thank you kindly for lending us your time and your voice to this discussion, and especially speaking directly to the residents of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean region who are all eagerly interested in your perspective on this matter.
Well, good evening. It's good of you to have me, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have someone here of your caliber, both in terms of learned knowledge and experience, to give us some perspective on what exactly is taking place in the Caribbean basin at this time. Um, Recently, there has been a massive buildup of military assets both in the Caribbean Sea and now as well in the Pacific Ocean, all in the name of combating narcoterrorism and preventing the trafficking of illegal drugs into the United States. What are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are, is that this isn't the right model to combat the drug problem in the United States. And I'll break that down into a couple reasons. First of all, the major drug overdose problem in the United States is coming from fentanyl. Fentanyl is not coming from South America. It's not coming on these vessels at all. It is manufactured in labs in Mexico and other places, and then brought across on land borders. So the drug that is responsible for 75 to 80% of the drug overdose deaths in the United States is not being addressed here. So that's the first problem with it. The second is that the United States and its partners worldwide, and specifically in the Caribbean, South American region, have methods to deal with smuggling of cocaine from South America up into North America. There are tried and true law enforcement methods. For 25 plus years, the Coast Guard, other agencies in the United States, and our partners in the region have combined intelligence. We've combined our ships and our aircraft. One of the models that will stop these smuggling boats, which I will call go fast boats, and most of the ones that have been, with one exception, these have been go fast boats that have been hit with airstrikes. We have methods to stop them using snipers from helicopters. And the problem has been is that we've just not dedicated enough resources to the problem. We've always had more intelligence, more information about where the drug smuggling vessels are moving and where they're coming from than we've had ships, helicopters, and patrol aircraft to catch them. So it's been a matter of deciding to attack this seriously with enough resources. When you attack in a law enforcement mode, you do a couple things. One, you arrest people. And from those people, you get intelligence because they want to trade information for lighter prison sentences. That's what fuels the intelligence. That's what tells you what's going on inside the drug producing and the drug transit areas. When you have military strikes and you kill those people preemptively, you have no arrestees, you have no intelligence. When you also attack on a law enforcement mode, you have clear partners, clear legitimacy, a clear focus on what you're doing. You have evidence. If you make mistakes and it's not about carrying drugs, you haven't killed anybody. they can go free. And you have to prove your case, which generally isn't that hard to do. So there are many, many advantages to attacking it in that particular mode. Plus, it doesn't confuse people. It allows you to say, I have a cocaine problem and I have a fentanyl problem. And you understand which one is causing the deaths and which one is not causing the massive amount of deaths.
Well, you would be aware that there were instances in which persons were recovered from the scenes of these strikes. They were recovered in the water, and they were alive and held by U.S. military officials, only to be immediately released and repatriated back to their home countries. So, does this speak to intent or a lack of intent by the US, or is there no legal justification for them to be held? And is this the US military saying that, we have no intention and we have no justification to arrest and hold or interrogate these individuals?
Well, to answer the question, the first part of the question is what type of jurisdiction the United States has to take to arrest people for law enforcement purposes can be a little bit complicated, but to simplify it, if a vessel isn't claimed as a vessel of some country, i.e. the country doesn't say, yes, that's my ship and I want to exercise jurisdiction over it, then the vessel is a stateless vessel. And if it's stateless, the United States or any country on earth can exercise jurisdiction over the vessel. And for the vast majority of these go-fast smuggling vessels, they don't have any registration in any nation. Many of them are built in the jungles to escape any kind of notice or tracking from law enforcement or other authorities. And when they're intercepted on the high seas, if they do claim that they're from, say, Colombia or Trinidad or Panama or some other country in the region, the United States has treaties with those countries, what we call bilateral agreements, where we can very quickly work with those countries to say, is this really your vessel or not? And if it is your vessel, will you allow us to exercise jurisdiction because there looks like there's a bunch of cocaine on board? And that's a very quick process. And it's worked very well for decades and decades and decades. I first started working with those kinds of agreements in the 1980s. And when I left the Coast Guard in 2013, there were well over 30 of those bilateral agreements in place that allowed us to exercise jurisdiction in the right cases. And we could share information with the partner nations that were working with us.
As we're on the subject of regional partnership, recently the leaders of CARICOM have indicated that they would like the US to withdraw their vessels and their troops, and they have declared the Caribbean basin as a zone of peace. This has been a consensus among the majority of CARICOM leaders, with one exception being the Prime Minister of this country, Trinidad and Tobago, who has openly supported the US action and strikes and claims that this country is also afflicted by the transnational drug trade and as such sees this as a necessary evil to protect the citizens and the streets of Trinidad and Tobago. What are your views on this?
I certainly don't have any expertise to speak about Trinidad as an individual nation and what would be a proper policy and the different political things that would go into that. I do look very fondly on my days when, in general, U.S. naval vessels were seen as friends throughout the region. And you would know if you say you had a hurricane like Hurricane Melissa come through the region, you were happy that there were U.S. vessels, military vessels in the area that might be of assistance to you. Or if you had fishermen working further offshore, you were happy to be able to perhaps lean on the resources of the United States to help save and protect your people. That's certainly what I would return to. I think part of that also was the knowledge that those vessels were helping combat the narcotics trade in a law enforcement mode. Even a naval vessel from, say, the United States, the UK, Canada, and some other countries could act as a law enforcement platform because they put what we call Coast Guard law enforcement attachments on there. They would act as they would do the boardings. They would act as the law enforcement officials, even though it was a military or a naval vessel. So those, I think, are the I kind of long for those days.
Yeah.
I would much prefer to see the region working cooperatively together. Trinidad is a partner in a joint interagency task force that works out of Key West that's looking at detecting drug movements and monitoring them and working very closely with the interdiction effort. So I think that that's what I would probably prefer to see in the area. To answer your question, uh, I would prefer a law enforcement approach to this because the legality is clear and unquestioned. The current approach with military strikes, I have not seen a clear legal justification for it. And armed conflict is a very different thing than coordinated law enforcement efforts. And that opens up a question for many countries throughout the world, particularly some with bad autocratic regimes or bad authoritarian regimes that might want to engage in armed conflict with people that they don't like. And if there aren't clear legal justifications that comply with the UN Charter and the International Law of Humanitarian, the International Law of Armed Conflict and many other requirements, it really opens the door for bad regimes to do bad things. And that's very concerning to me.
Well, as you bring up uh, the partnership that the U.S. has had with the Caribbean leaders, based on her support of President Trump and his campaign against these narco-terrorists, there have been numerous threats made by the Maduro regime in Venezuela against our prime minister and against his country and its citizens. And recently, our Minister of Defense has said that he's not worried about these threats, mainly because he is confident that the US will step in to defend us as allies and as partners in the region from any unwarranted attacks by the Venezuelan militia. Um, what are your thoughts on this? And is this a good position for this country to take as a US ally? And would the US actually intervene and assist if the conflict grew to a war between both nations?
Well, I don't have the expertise of all of the regional politics, very localized regional politics that are necessary for your government to chart a safe path in these waters, metaphorically and literally. I would expect, and I can't speak for the United States government, but I would expect that it would be very concerned about an armed attack from a country, be it Venezuela or another nation in the region, against a peaceful country that has been an ally. And I would think that that you would see a serious response. And I probably can't speculate much further than that. And your government, I am sure, is in discussions. And I would say that it's a very different question as to whether the strikes themselves against the suspected drug smuggling vessels is a very different matter than how the U.S. or other nations would respond if there was an armed attack against your country. And those are two very different questions. I do
Yeah.
understand that they can be intertwined by other events and so forth, but legally and morally and as a matter of actions between nations, those are very different questions.
So, Admiral Alvin Holdley, who is the head of the U.S. Southern Command, recently announced his retirement, which many commentators have described as both sudden and premature. And while I don't believe any firm reason has been given by Admiral Halsey regarding his retirement, I think that the timing of this resignation is somewhat suspect. Now, is there any insight that you may be able to provide as to why Admiral Halsey might have tendered his resignation when he did, and what this might signal regarding what's taking place under his command right now?
I don't have any specific intelligence or any sources inside Southern Command that would give any inside information. I do agree that it is highly unusual. Um, Combatant commanders or commanders like the commander of Southern Command do not usually cut their tour short. They also do not announce retirement plans when there is a major operation happening in their region. So that would lead most people to believe that there's something unusual happening here. And it very well may be that there's a differences agreements about the legality of a strategy, the appropriateness of a strategy. But we don't know for sure. And I won't discount the possibility that there's something else happening. But we do know that many of the normal processes for making these types of decisions are not the same as they used to be. The National Security Council functions differently. We don't have the same leadership, there, the same staffing that we used to have. Obviously, the Department of Defense is functioning differently. The Judge Advocate Generals of all of the services have been replaced or at least dismissed, and many of them do not have permanent replacements there. All of those things are signals and signs that things are not happening as they might normally be. And I think people kind of have to draw their own conclusions as to Admiral Halsey's reasons for his particular decision. I don't know Admiral Halsey. I do know people that know him and that speak very highly of him. And he obviously has a highly decorated career.
This actually leads into a larger point that we have not really been hearing from any member of the US military on these missions and these strikes. And all communication has been coming either from the White House or the Department of State or the Department of War. But we haven't heard anything from the Joint Chiefs. We haven't heard anything from a commanding officer of any vessel that's involved in this conflict. Is this standard protocol? And what do you think may be the reason for the lack of information coming out of the military uh, on this matter?
I think that this is an unusual situation. And I do think that the administration wants to very tightly control what is said. And it isn't entirely clear who or what military units have been conducting the strikes to date. It's not clear what their intelligence is, and it's not clear what that whole operational, what we would say, chain of command has been to date. All of those things raise questions, but it also makes me not surprised at all that the public statements are coming directly from the White House or from the Department of Defense itself at the highest levels. Because with something so unusual and without any, without the solid apparent legal basis, they're going to be very careful about who the spokespeople are. In fact, likely you don't have a lot of people clamoring to go in front of cameras and talk about that mission under those circumstances.
This leads me to my final question this evening. And what do you think will be the most likely outcome of this entire campaign? And how long do you think that it will go on for? Because if nothing happens in Venezuela in terms of the Maduro regime and how they are operating, how long can the US realistically sustain simply striking at these vessels in the Caribbean Sea? And how much is it going to cost? And what are they expecting out of it? Um, so that is my final question. Uh, what do you think the outcome will be, and when do you think we'll see that outcome actually achieved?
Well, I think there are several outcomes are clear, and I'll make it first very localized for Trinidad and Venezuela. I think that smuggling from Venezuela to Trinidad or other islands will stop very quickly. But frankly, that doesn't have much to do with drug smuggling to the United States. The first vessel that was struck with 11 people on it certainly did not have very much cocaine on there in terms of the kinds of large loads that would make it to the United States. You don't do that with 11 people on a go fast boat. That takes up space and weight that would go to cocaine if you were doing serious smuggling. And that was probably just, if it had cocaine on board, it was supplying the island chains, the Windward Islands, and was probably carrying other people that didn't have proper clearance to go between islands. That would be my speculation. My experience, we generally saw vessels like that with some kind of a mixed load, were primarily moving people and would also carry some drugs or other things as a byproduct of that. So I think that you'll see what little amount of drugs did come out of Venezuela will stop, but that wasn't very much anyway. You will see some stop in the rest of the Caribbean temporarily. Again, that's maybe only 10% of what was going to North America came out of the Caribbean anyway. And you may, if they continue strikes in the Eastern Pacific, you may see a slowdown in flow there. It's a much larger area and much harder to stop vessels. The big drug smuggling organizations adapt. They're already looking at ways to go around this and to do this differently. And there may be a slowdown in the supply of cocaine to North America for a while, but it will probably pick up after some time. It will become expensive at some point in time to have all of these. Aircraft carrier strike forces are very expensive. Because once you have the carrier there, you have to devote a lot of time and effort to protecting the carrier. It's so valuable that you just have a certain size of a group that you must have, because you can't allow anything to seriously attack the carrier. And that becomes expensive over time, and we don't have that many of them. And to have one in the Caribbean means it's not someplace else in the world where it may be needed. Doing the same thing in the Eastern Pacific would be very, very hard. We can put more naval ships in the Eastern Pacific, and we can put more patrol planes, when frankly, as I started this conversation, we should do that, but we should put law enforcement detachments on those ships. We should use the right methods, and we should use those tools in a law enforcement manner, and we'll be more successful. The other thing that may happen here as well is we stop arresting people that will give us intelligence, we'll know less and less about what the drug organizations are doing. And I think the partnerships between nations may deteriorate, and that will provide less intelligence. And the Joint Interagency Task Force in Key West that looks at this will be less successful in figuring out what drugs are moving and where they're going. Now, that is only maybe part of what you were looking for, but I don't know with Venezuela what exactly will be happening. There clearly are larger issues at play politically between the administration and Venezuela that don't necessarily have much to do with cocaine smuggling. As you well know, cocaine's not produced in Venezuela, and the cocaine that leaves Venezuela is simply cocaine that it was easier to
Transport.
Drive it across land and launch to your island or other nations there from Venezuela, then from Colombia. It's simply a method, convenience.
Yeah.
So it isn't a major source or a major transit area that. So there's something else going on, and I can't really speculate as to what the administration's end result is. I certainly personally have absolutely no love for the Maduro regime. I think that they have not done well for their people. Obviously, it's created a lot of instability in the region. We need a solution that brings stability and that brings some prosperity and some life worth living for your neighbors in Venezuela. It's a country with a tremendous amount of natural resources, and it needs a structure that can help it, develop an economy, share the wealth of that economy with its people, and find a way to move into a better relationship with the rest of the region. So whether Maduro can do that is questionable. How you move to something else is questionable. Obviously, elections have been tried. They have not been successful. So I don't really know what the administration might be thinking as an end game. But I mean, certainly finding some way to transition to a regime that can integrate and work better with the economies of the region, develop their resources, get to the riches that should make that country prosperous and enviable. I don't know how to make that happen, but
Mhm.
something's got to give.
I suppose that just is how the situation needs to play out, and I guess we'll see for ourselves in the coming weeks. Admiral Bill Baumgartner, thank you so much for agreeing to do this and sharing your insight, your knowledge, your wisdom with us here this evening. Do you have any final thoughts?
I would say the region is keep faith. The United States, um, is much more than one administration, and understands. And there are many institutions and many in the United States that understand how we need to be tied together with our partners in this hemisphere, and how we can make the entire hemisphere better if we work together. And times will change. And if people are nervous and uncertain right now, I don't know what's going to happen in the near term, but long term, keep faith is what I would say. Keep engaged,
Sure.
keep faith.